gentlemen, you are more than welcome to the Coffee at 11 show, not the Wine at 11 show, the Coffee at 11 show. And today's show is brought to you courtesy of wigwam.ie SME peer support. And delighted to have you here, episode 62, and it is Bloomsday, June 16th, 2020. And it's wonderful to have you all here today. My special guest today is Mr. Donal Thurlow. And Donal Thurlow is a Joycean scholar, amongst many other things. Delighted that he's chosen to join us today. He's having a few tech problems, so Donal, I hope you can resolve that. And if you can, you might zoom into us.
Good morning, everyone. And happy Bloomsday to you all. Happy Bloomsday, yes, and coffee at 11 we gather. And like the people who like them, we gather to bless. And come, take a coffee or a glass. And indeed, the yes, to motivate, yes, I confess. And he wrote in the stream of consciousness, yes, where you don't say, your woman did this and then left. Or your man moseys in and says he to the room. But Bloom, that's the hero. You're inside his head. And you're sailing the seas of his marital bed, or wherever you're led, by the thoughts that go drifting and shifting in his yes, as he saunters the city of yes. And he glancing at moths, and he getting the hots, and he looking at the sky with his roving eye, and he bumps into neighbours, performing his labours, all on a Dublin days. And the words, like birds, confetti fall of language, and the slang and the yes, and the porter in the taps, and the Sandy Cove talk, and the Sandy Mount walk, and a sandwich and a jar in Davy Byrne's bar. And his memories mingle and jingle in his pocket, and tinkle old songs of the yes. And the day does be boiling like blazes, yes. And the bells and the smells and the apples and the chapels, and the hope and the sweet lemon soap. And Stephen, who don't be believing in God, but here at the end, he encounters a friend in the kips, where the lips of the ladies of the night do be calling like summer sirens. And what's the book about? Well, it's self, I suppose, and yourself and myself, and herself down the road, all your lads and lassies, Ulysses, his missus, see, she's called Molly, at home in her bed, and there's thoughts in her head, some of them shrewd, and some of them rude, and some of them flirty, and some downright yes, and food for the forehead in a novel he borrowed, called Sweets of Sin or something. Soliloquy, yes. Beautiful word. Like solitary and eloquent got married, yes. Funny thought, yes, if words could fall in love, well, think of the children they'd have, yes. Like Nora met Jimmy, their wedding so jolly. Kind of silly, yes, symmetry, cemetery, Paddy Dignam dead. And up to Glasnevin, and maybe to heaven, and Leopold thinking his thoughts, yes. In his carriage, thinking of his marriage, and the city royals around him, the noise and the boys, and they selling the papers, and thinking of capers, and gougers, and gutties, and bantams, and phantoms, and moon fruit, and mirth, and mothers giving birth, and Bloom, such a darling old dear. Well, it's many a year since sweet baby James, and we're stuck in the middle, one across the ocean, the other across the sea. Yes, and this town itself is grown up to a right old hames, for lately there's a sadness and a madness in the yes. See, they buggered us up across the ocean and the sea too. They're a pack of greedy yes. I'd give them a route up the yes for themselves. And yes, there's a mess, there's no point in denial. Him, yes. But James would remind you through trouble and trial, there's things to be proud of still, yes. More the people we love, or a novel you read, or a red-weathered moon, or something was said in your kitchen, or walking on his birthday through Stephen's Green in the yes of the yes of the yes. James Joyce, yes, that's what it means. A book worth a look for the secret it tells. We can walk from the tomb and we still might bloom, for the very last word will be Yes. So there we go, folks.
Buddha bus indeed. Happy Bloomsday, Donal Thurlow.
Thank you. I'll start off with my first drink, Hugo.
Donal is a gentleman and a scholar, and he follows protocol, and he's going to do this right. Donal, it's an absolute pleasure to have you in. What an entrance. First one for sure like that. And of course, you and your tech problems beforehand. Oh yeah, big setup. Lovely to have you, Donal. Lovely to have you in the cafe today, the Coffee at 11 show, in front of an international audience on Bloomsday. In fact, we're delighted, to be honest, because pandemic has if you like, cut your jib, if that's the right term, and it's allowed you be there, so you can be here with us. Otherwise, you'd be flat out busy today. Donal, will you take us back to the early years? Let's go back pre your Joycean years. Tell us who's Donal Thurlow? Way back, please.
Okay, I was born in the same year the Republic was declared, and the historians amongst you will work out how old I am. And I'll tell you later if you can't. I was born in a place called Inchicore. The Limerick poet Michael Hartnett wrote one of his very famous poems, Inchicore Haiku. Born in a little row of streets, a little like Coronation Street, and it was a place called the Ranch, actually. I think one of the Dublin City Corporation planners must have liked cowboy films or something. Born in the same street that Thomas Kinsella was born in. He lived about 10 doors down. I only lived there for a year, and we moved to Palmerstown. My dad bought the first house on Kennelsford Road. And when we lived there, there was nothing. You know, there was Kennelsford Road, which is new. There was very little between the top of Kennelsford Road and what was to become Cherry Orchard and Ballyfermot on one hand. And of course, there was no big motorway coming out of Dublin. You know, I could walk down Kennelsford Road, across a field to go and visit my nan who lived in Robin, a place called Robin Villas. And even they were interesting because they were a set of houses built for heroes. After the First World War, my grandfather was a captain in the Royal Fusiliers and Royal Engineers. And that was interesting later when all the trouble started. Might come back to that. Went to a little primary school, a wonderful little primary school at the end of Palmerston. It's still there, but it's now a community centre. Wonderful head teacher, just a 2-classroom school. And at one stage, I was at the front of this sort of tiered classroom seating. My brother, who was 18 months older than me, was halfway back. And my sister, who was 2 or 3 years old, was in the back row. And this wonderful teacher taught everybody. Years and years later, I can still remember all the poems he told me. And it stood me in good stead because when I got to a secondary school in England, it was different. So that was Palmerstown. We had, listening yesterday to Gay, we had 3 grocery shops. Everything she said I agreed with. And we were so used to, as children, you know, going and helping the shop. I hated one job, that was weighing potatoes. You know, my father and mother say, go out and weigh a stone of potatoes or half stone for Mrs. Thing. I can still, it's like chalk on a board. I can still feel that, ooh. But I also, you know, I mean, those are the days, tea would arrive in a big tea chest. And one of the, I mean, talk about education on the job. You'd stand there with little blue bags and you'd weigh a quart of tea and you'd seal the bag and you'd do dozens and dozens of those. That was one of the jobs. Also, I mean, I heard Gay talking about it, a big, massive bacon slicer with a blade, which in our shop, the safety thing was taken off because my father said it got in the way. But, you know, at 10, would you do 6 rashers for Mrs. Thing and she likes them thick? I'd get the thing and go and do the rashers. So it was not safety code. An interesting part of it, my father was a very good businessman. He wasn't my best parent. I love my mother, but I'll tell you about that. He bought Coca-Cola in bulk, one of the first in Dublin to have sort of large quantities of Coca-Cola. And my brother John, who and myself, at sort of 10, 11, 12, 13, we would go up to the shop on a Sunday morning ourselves to open the shop and papers and one or two other things for early people. So we sometimes would walk from Palmerstown up the back road, up to the ranch where one of the shops was, open the shop, and we got bored. We had an old Danzet, I think it was a Danzet, a record player. So John one morning decided to lug it all the way, carrying it, and we brought a few records. And it was amazing. I mean, the first lesson in marketing, within a very, very short space of time, the teenage generation realized, well, if you go down to Thurlow's shop, you can get a Coke and they'll play records. And they started bringing records. And the local customers couldn't get in, you know. It was like Cafe 21 at the time. So that was interesting. At one stage, we moved. They built a new school, St. Philomena's, in Palmerstown. And again, health and safety. The move, we were told we were going to move school on the day. And the head teacher and the other teacher, Miss Doyle, who was a fearsome lady who taught the infants, she taught me for First Holy Communion. I was terrified of her because she'd pinch your cheek if you got it wrong. Moving schools, we were just lined up. You were given a chair to carry and walk about half a mile to the new school, or a pile of books up and down, and that's how we moved school. So that was it. Loved the head teacher, wrote a poem about him a few years ago and sent it to his sons. One of his sons was Fergal Fleming, became a TD, and I got such a lovely letter back. It was wonderful. So I was delighted to have sent that to me. He printed it and sent it to all his siblings.
Donal, let me just come in here for a second, please, and just catch up with you, if I may. That was just a beautiful introduction in every sense. Loved your James Joyce rap, your Bloomsday rap at the start. So thank you for that. That'll go down in Coffee at 11 annals. Listen, just a couple of things. I was watching heads nodding at various different junctures there in your story. The slicer, no health and safety. Take that safety thing off, it's getting in the way. I love the phrase, do 6 rashers for Mrs. Thing, she likes them thick. Love it. The dance set record player, so lots of heads nodding for that one. And as you say, lessons in marketing 101, you play a bit of music and the teenagers will turn up anywhere. It's wonderful stuff. Loved also the fact that you expressed your love for your head teacher, that so much so that that teacher impressed upon you the love of language through poetry. If I think it's the same person, and then that you reached out some years later and wrote to that person and told them that they'd made a difference in your life. That's just lovely stuff. Do you want to talk a little more about that before we go to the next phase?
Yeah, I mean, I moved to England, obviously, and so I finished national school in Ireland at the beginning of a long summer holidays. Moved to England, and within a few weeks, my mum looked at people forget sometimes, I think, there's only 8% Catholics in England. So it's a small community. And therefore, the education system, Catholics run their own schools, and it's a very complicated sense of funding, as I found out later. So I was sent to a local secondary school. Mother bought the new uniform and all that sort of stuff. And on my first day, now this was 1961, I think, 61, about that. On my first day walking down the corridor, I heard a teacher say, "Oh, he's another one just arrived off the boat." Talk about discrimination and so on these days. And I was put into a class. It was streamed, very strictly streamed, 1C. And I spent hours in this class with poor kids who weren't well taught, couldn't read properly, couldn't do maths. And 40-minute periods, I would do what was required in 10 minutes. And in a short space of time, I'd just think. On the 4th day, a temporary teacher came in, and nobody wanted to teach this class, not a temporary, a substitute for that day. And he said, does anybody, he was trying to be nice, does anybody know any poetry, anything this, anything that? And I sort of very shyly put, I do. and I recited 3 or 4 poems, Yeats and 1 or 2 other things, and I could say them in their rhythm, because Mr. Fleming, who we irreverently called Baldy, were teachers in a particular rhyme and rhythm. And this guy, thank goodness for him, he said, read another one, read another. And even the other kids, God bless them, they went quiet. He went back to the staff room, saw the deputy head, said, somebody's put this kid in the wrong class, And I was moved that day, walked down the corridor into another classroom, into 1A. And eventually I ended up as head boy in that school. So it was an interesting thing. The second interesting thing in that school was I left Ireland with an educated, well-educated Republican head teacher, Mr. Fleming. And we were just finishing the story of Cromwell before I left Ireland. And, Cromwell was not a nice man. I was going to use a much to hell at Connacht, as we all know, all that sort of stuff, massacres at Drogheda. I get to England, lo and behold, the first lesson is about Cromwell, and he's a bloody hero. So, that's the issue of, primary sources are important. They really are important. And these days, the relevance of fake news, check your sources. So it was interesting.
That's very real. We've got people here from Ireland, we've got people here from the UK, we've got people here from all over the world. And certainly us Irish and English in the cafe today will understand exactly what Donal was talking about here. But what we are talking about is as you say, fake news. This goes way back. This has been there since the dawn of time. It's propaganda. It's who's telling the story and what are they hoping to achieve by telling the story. And but it's really interesting to hear you recount the fact that as a young boy, you could see literally from one week to the next, the stark difference in storytelling and the impact that has. Incredible stuff. Mr. Fleming, by the way, you got the Bula bus there, the rapturous silent applause when you mentioned that that teacher came in for one day and noticed that you were in the wrong classroom. And isn't it wonderful the way the universe smiles when the time is right?
Yeah.
And you to 1A. Right, continue. This is great stuff.
Went through the school. That first lesson gave me an interest I had the interest in literature. My mother was a great reader. And that first lesson gave me an interest in history. Came head boy and then went on to university, trained to be a teacher. Was one of the first cohorts through a new degree, a Bachelor of Education degree. It again was an interesting, and even at that level, there were some issues of discrimination. We had a fantastic history lecturer, a guy called Dyer, but he wrote a history book called Pax Britannica, and he was an imperialist, I suppose you'd call him these days. I don't think he was a nasty imperialist. I don't think he'd been joining right-wing extremists. But he had a view of the empire and a view of Ireland. And I chose for a thesis the treatment of the Irish question in English journals, and particularly in Punch. And you may not know, in all those horrible, they reappeared at the time of the Birmingham bombings and some of the troubles, those cartoons of the gorilla-like Irishman with a protruding chin and all those, they came from Punch magazine. And I wrote a well-researched thing, and so on. And it was the days when they were marked, and he marked me down. He gave me a very low score. One of the lecturers at college was an Irishman, John McGurk, and he was part of the English Historical Society, History Today magazine in England. He was an editor. The college bar, I went to St. Mary's College first before it became a constituent college of London University. The college bar was the old church. It was great. You went up the altar to buy your drinks from the bar. And John McGurk came in one day and I was sitting there and he said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Well, I'm not great, just got my mouth." He said, "Let me read it." So I went up, I lived upstairs. The rooms were upstairs. And it was Horace Walpole's old house in Twickenham. And I brought it down again. 2 days later, he came to me and he said, that's not marked properly. You should do something about it. Take it to the academic board. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, you can go along, you can appeal and you're allowed to have somebody with you. And I'll go with you," he said. I can't go through the whole story. I was terrified again. You go across the principal and they bring in a couple of independent assessors. He went with me and I went from a C to an A+. So that was another victory against discrimination. Taught in several schools, but eventually taught in quite a large failing school in Worcestershire. And the numbers were down about 300 and hardly anybody applying. And I really went into it with a desire and a strength. I was a workaholic. One of your previous speakers was talking about preparing. I had the rack of white shirts and I wore nothing for about 20 years to work apart from a Navy Marks and Spencer suit, which I bought more on a regular basis. And in my office, I would have another 4 or 5 ironed white shirts. And sometimes I didn't come home at all, I'd stay in school for an evening meeting. But I loved the place, but I changed it fundamentally. It was my second head job. I'd learned a lot in the first one. And some of the things, I'll come to one of the books later. I can't remember, somewhere it said, you're not selling things, you're giving a service and so on. The school had lots of problems. And the first thing I did was impose school uniform. And I set up a system, I haven't got time to go into it now, where the kids who couldn't afford it, the family, we bought it for them. And we did it very tactfully. And even then, some of the kids, you'd give them a school uniform, you give them a shirt, blazer tie. And the school was divided between a very middle-class area and a very poor area. And the secretary one wonderful secretary, she'd come to me, and of several secretaries, she'd say, look, young Johnny, he's looking a bit scruffy. Can I get down the town? She'd go down the town, she'd buy underpants, vests, shirts, ties, new trousers for him and so on, a couple of shirts, and she would call him in. She'd wait till he came out of sport and had a shower. She'd take him into the medical room, she'd give him the new clothes, and then week after week, she'd swap them. She'd take the ones he'd worn because she knew he'd sleep in them, he wouldn't get, but eventually you could walk into the classrooms and you could not tell by the way children were dressed what class they were or what money they had. And that was an aim of mine.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story. And stop selling, start serving. And that's exactly what is coming through there. Your people, led by you, of course, serving the population. And it's absolutely the opposite of discrimination. So congratulations.
Yeah, and parents' evenings, parents would come along to this school, a very big building, dozens and dozens of classrooms, 3 floors. When I got there, the first evening of parents' evening, I just observed, and it was bloody chaos. They'd arrive, they might have their child's form teacher to see, and maybe 8 or 9 other teachers, subject teachers, and they'd wander around, and I wandered around outside every classroom where there was a subject teacher. There would be a row of chairs and teachers sitting, and parents sitting. They'd wait hours and hours to get to see. So I called a meeting of the staff and said, look, who are the customers here? And let me tell you, we become a grant maintained school. It's the only thing I ever said that Margaret Thatcher did that benefited me. Grant maintained moved the funding from going all the way through the local authority to giving the grant straight to the school. So I got all the money in the school, and I hired a bursar, which in a sort of semi-state school was different, and he was very good. So we bought everything ourselves. We would buy bulk paper and sell it to the other schools cheaper than they can get it from the county. But grant maintained gave me a lot of flexibility in the school, both with staff and wages and salaries and so on. We were the first grant maintained school in the Catholic sector. We were the first Catholic school to be Ofsteded. Ofsted was testing in England, and if Irish schools are ever introduced to the regime, they will get a hell of a shock. I changed the parenting. I had the senior management team. They would welcome people in the hall. Parents would be shown into the hall. The back of the hall was turned into a cafe, really, you know, gingham tablecloths, and the school cook would come in and the oldest children would serve coffee and biscuits while parents are waiting. Around the edge of the hall, there was a table with each year tutor, a class tutor, sitting at a table with a sign. And one of the senior staff would meet the parents and say, I'll come and get you when it's your turn. Parents rarely waited long. And it was the form tutor's job and the head of year's job to gain all the reports for everyone to report it. And then if a parent wanted to see somebody else, the history teacher or the PE teacher, they would be taken by a pupil to where they were. And if they wanted to see a deputy head, and there were several, if they wanted to see me, they were taken there. But it changed the whole atmosphere, and there was music, kids playing in the corridors, violins and cellos and stuff. And it just changed the atmosphere in the school, and that was significant.
And Bridget started the Bula bus there. You looked at the chaos, and you asked at a staff meeting, you asked, who are our customers here? Really lovely question. And then you went and found solutions to all the problems. Listen, it's lovely stuff. I think we're well caught up on who the man is. Can we go to the Joycean era? Because
okay, of course you can. Well, we'll have a couple of quick readings as well.
Where did that start? Please don't.
It started, got to do A-levels in England. Interestingly, English literature. And when I got the reading list, James Joyce's Dubliners was on it. If we'd been a drunkard, he wouldn't have been on it, but he was, and they didn't know. I went home, you know, to my mum, who was a great reader, and several things happened. First, I said, oh, Mum, you know, Dublin, I didn't leave Dublin until I was 11. And I said, Dublin is on. She said, oh, I read it. She said, I worked with his sister. The family were very embarrassed by him. She worked with Eileen Shrek. And, you know, I didn't believe her for years until she actually told me. And, you know, that was one of them. And then, you know, I read Dubliners, fell in love with it. The greatest collection of short stories in the world. And if you haven't read it, you should. And I'll read a tiny bit of it later today. And went on, Portrait of the Artist and all those sort of things. Suzanne, my dear wife, who's sitting to the left of me, her great-granduncle was Reverend J.J. O'Malloy. He baptized James Joyce. James Joyce died in 1941, I think, on the 13th of January. My birthday's the 13th of January. And there's so much. So I just got to love Joyce, you know, and went through a working career, came home to Ireland after it 20-something years ago. 30 years teaching almost day to day. And, you know, in my life, several times I've moved on from what I was doing to try something else. I'm a great believer in change and not persevere. If I start a book and it's not a great book, I don't persevere. It's the author's job to get me in there in the first 20 pages. People do that with Ulysses, but it's a shame. Should always start with the Cyclops chapter, but I'll get that. And that's how I got into it. And then, you know, I came to Bruff in Ireland, sat down with Suzanne, and we had choices. You know, Suzanne's sister was in New York. My elder sister was Suzanne's sister was in Connecticut, and my elder sister lived in South Africa. I had been there for years. I'm from Dublin, and Suzanne was from Limerick. Look who lost the argument. I'm living in Limerick for the last 20 years, but I love it. We bought a place, ugly little cottage to start with, but you know, location. It's by a river. We've got a river. We can lie in bed and look down the field at a waterfall, so it's great. And then, you know, I going to Dublin, thinking of going to Dublin for Bloomsday, and realized there was a fantastic connection between Bruff and James Joyce. None of them knew. None of them made a great thing of it. There's a pub down the road called Clancy's. George Clancy, it's his family's descendants run the pub. George Clancy was mayor of Limerick in 1922, and he was murdered by the Black and Tans in front of his wife. But before that, he'd been James Joyce's best friend, and Joyce didn't have many best friends at UCD. And Clancy had been a nationalist, and he dragged Joyce along to a Gaelic League, some Gaelic League meetings, depending on who you read. Joyce either went because he fancied one of the women or because he wanted to have an argument, but he went along. And I started a festival called Bloomsday in Bruff, and it was amazing. Who was the head of the school that came the first year? John Heslin? No. Anyway, the what's even the school? We'll come back to it in a minute. We had some great speakers that came along the first year. We had messages from David Norris and so on. And, you know, it developed. I did it for 10 years. I missed out the last couple of years, although I set it up so something happened. I missed out because I got invited to Ars Neutron by Michael D, my man, and you know, big choice. Stay in Bruff, look after here, go and spend Bloomsday with Michael D. It wasn't a big thing, and that was a couple of great years there. He's not doing it this year, obviously, but he is doing it online. There is a Bloomsday there. There is a Bloomsday there. So that's, you know, and Bloomsday and Bruff developed. I mean, there's great discussion about Joyce's love of his country or not love of his country. But he did love his country. He lived in Paris at one stage, and he was a spendthrift. He spent all the money he could. And he had a carpet made, specially made, with the map of Ireland on it. So he walked in Ireland every day on the carpet. But if you read portraits of the artist, the character, well, there were two versions of portrait. One was called Stephen Hero, and then Portrait of the Artist. The character Davin Madden is George Clancy. And there's a humorous bit, and we have time, I don't know how the time's going, where Stephen, Joyce, Madden, Clancy talk about nationalism and you know, Joyce, as Stephen is taking a ride. Yeah, I'll be there. I'll have my Hurley on my shoulder when you're all going. I'll help you. And he's very sarcastic. And interestingly, towards the end of that period in Portrait, Clancy, Madden says, "Don't worry, our day will come. Chucky Arlo." And that's possibly one of the first references. It's been used by many other people since, but it's there in Portrait. Do you want me to read a little bit of that?
Go on.
Or should we keep talking?
Yeah, no. Read a small amount. Read a small amount. I was earlier. You were talking about. I'll read this later on, and I was thinking this isn't the 36-hour one, by the way, that you were talking.
Oh God, no.
This is the coffee.
So he says, "You're a terrible man, Stevie," said Davin, taking the short pipe from his mouth. Now that you've signed for the petition for universal peace, said Stephen, I'll jump a bit. As Davin didn't answer, Stephen began to quote, "Long peace, Fianna, right incline, Fianna, Fianna by numbers, salute, 1, 2. That's a different question, said Davin. I'm an Irish nationalist first and foremost, but that's you all out. You're a born sneerer, Stevie. Oh, don't worry, Stephen. When you make the next rebellion with 36, says Stephen, I'll be there, and you'll want the indispensable informer. I can find you a few in this college. I can't understand you, said Davin. One time I might hear you talk about English literature. Now you talk against the Irish informers. What with your name and your ideas? Are you Irish at all? And it goes on, but it's well worth reading, and it gives the picture of a Joyce and things. Joyce.
You know what it does? It makes it. Sorry, Donal. What it does is it makes it very real. It makes it very real. He was a real man, you know, who lived in our land and shaped it and shaped world literature by his phenomenal gift of storytelling. And this is really lovely. Donal, thank you for coming in today for sharing this with us. Yes, indeed, put a bus there, because most of us don't take the time to step, back, if you like, and steep ourselves in this stuff. So it's lovely to have you here. Tell us a little more about Michael D's gatherings. Would you mind, please?
Not at all. He's, look, I'll be very honest. When Michael D got the job, I thought, yeah, nice man. I'd read some of his writings. I hope he's not watching, but I'm not a mad fan of his poetry, but I've read some of his social writings, and he's fantastic. But the more I got to know him, and I was actually in the UK when he spoke to the English House of Commons, the joint House of Commons, and he stunned them. Berko went, wow, a bit like the president when the Queen used a few words at Askelga. And I've got to know him. He came to Limerick to unveil a plaque to Desmond O'Grady. Desmond O'Grady is probably better known in the halls of Harvard than he is in Limerick. You could stand in the streets in Limerick, maybe in Dublin. A great writer, great translator, and died in West Cork a few years ago. And Michael D came. Well, we'd set up a wonderful thing. We had several students reading some of the original texts that he translated and so on in the White House, the home of Limerick poets at one stage. And I was sitting there. I was MC for the thing, and we'd had lots of instructions from Michael D's office about what we could do and what we couldn't do, and people wanted to have photographs, and he had to get away on time and all sort of this. And we borrowed some nice chairs. I didn't want him to sit on the beaten, worn chairs in the White House. We borrowed some chairs from the council office, and I sat beside him, and his aide de camp was on the other side, and he's chatting away. And the President of Ireland leans over to me and he says, "You'll give me a little bit of warning when I'm on, won't you?" I thought, "Yes, sir. Yes, I will." And he stood up and he gave a lecture. He started off using his notes. Then he put the notes down and he gave a lecture that would have graced any university hall, wide-ranging in every way. And I just sat and I thought, God. And then the wonderful man, he just ignored all the protocol. He had his photograph taken without everybody. He sat there, and Suzanne was delighted because she sent a text out, WhatsApp, "I'm at the White House with the president."
Having lunch.
Having lunch with the president, sir. And then, I got invited. He heard about, I have some mutual friends, a couple who know him really well. And one of them organizes his Bloomsday. And I got invited to Bloomsday. And it's just a great day. It's just a fantastic day. One of the Bloomsday, we brought across a lovely singer, Ilaria Sonetti, and she does several songs connected with Joyce. What's the one she does?
Oh, Antonio.
Oh, Antonio, that song. She does that beautifully. And it's one of his favorites. And she'd sung we brought her across from Trieste, and she'd sung the previous day at the National Library. She'd done a couple of other gigs for us. And she came to the festival, and she did one performance in one of the rooms in Ars an Uachtaráin. And then Michael D missed it because he had to go out. So his daughter came to me and said, "Do you think you could get Ilaria to sing again, the girl to sing again?" So I went up to her and I said, "Would you mind doing it again?" She said, "Oh, Donal, I said, "For the President of Ireland, of course." And she went in and she did, and he loved it. And it was amazing to see the affection between Sabina and him. And she's a great Joycean as well, a great reader. And we were delighted because when most people went home, we were invited to stay, and we had a bit of a dance on the lawn, and there was a little jazz combined. She's a very good dancer and I love the man. I love the man. I think we are, when you look across, as I said in the introduction, the Atlantic one way and the Irish Sea and the other, we're very lucky with the leader we've got at the moment. And he's a president who's not afraid to say things, which is good.
Lovely. Donal, Donal, thank you. That's just a beautiful, beautiful story. Kathy Mera has zoomed in from New Hampshire. You're very welcome, Kathy. But just to let you know, the White House that Donal was referring to is actually a pub here in Limerick City, affectionately known as the White House.
Yeah.
Just
sorry.
in case you were thinking he was giving out about the seating in the White House in Ireland. Okay, so really great. Donal, this is just a beautiful conversation, really beautiful conversation. I want to move it on slightly in terms of us inviting some participation from the audience, if that's okay. So I'm going to open it up, if I may, for comment or question. Before I do, however, you mentioned Michael D. And you mentioned that he's a beautiful man, and we all think so. We all think so. And I'm putting it out there, and I'm putting it to you specifically, publicly now, that the Coffee at 11 show finishes Series 1 on Friday, the 7th of August. And we have 3 slots that I'm hoping for. Slot on Wednesday, the 5th of August, is the lovely Katrina O'Brien, who's our editor-in-chief, and she is definitely a person worth meeting. And we want her here in the cafe, Buddha Bus all around. The 6th of August is my dad. My dad is Tommy O'Brien. He's 82 on the 6th of August, so he's coming in. And the 7th is open, my friends. The 7th is open. And the person we'd like to come in and join us for Coffee at 11 is President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins. Up to you. Over to you.
I'm going to try and do what I can. Before we move on, two things, you know, and this guy is important because he knows the secretaries and so on, our resolution. You know, you can wear boaters like this, you know, or you can go to the Bailey as the crowd on the very first Bloomsday did, drunk, and you can wear a Bloomsday at the Bailey. But the real one to wear is one of these. And you'll see Michael D wearing one all the time. And this is a John Shevlin hat, John Shevlin milliner. And Michael D, he wears them all the time. And so this is the one. And John Shevlin is a great man. And if you look, he also is the spitting image of James Joyce. And he's invited all sorts of places. We were bringing him to Trieste this year, but we had to cut that. But a film's being made about him as he wandered around Dublin last Bloomsday by an American filmmaker, and about his role as a milliner. So that's a John Shevlin hat. And just to go back to the schools once, I used 2 books in my time there, and the references Eamon has got, and he'll put them up. Those 2, they're by a man called Gerard Egan. The first one is Assessing and Designing Excellence, and the second is Managing Innovation and Change. And Gerard Egan, he quoted, and I'll try and find it quickly, and I can't. At the very, he was, I'm not sure if he still is, he's a professor at Chicago University. And in chapter 1, he wrote, "In a higher world, it is otherwise, but here below to live's to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often." John Henry Cardinal Newman. And Egan I worked with him as a facilitator. He wrote a book called The Skilled Helper in Counselling, and he taught non-directed counselling a long time. And Eamon's got the references to both these books, and they're good. And the other book that I used was a book by a man called Howard Gardner. And Howard Gardner wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence and the 5 Intelligences. We followed Carl Rogers as well. And I worked on a philosophy in the school, 2 philosophies to the staff. Treat every child as if it was your own child, and every child has a gift. And it's our job to find that gift and bring it out. And that was Howard Gardner's work. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. So now, sorry, where did you ask me to go on to?
Don't be sorry at all, Don. Don't be sorry at all. Thoroughly rich today, thoroughly rich having this conversation with you. Thank you very much for being here. I somehow feel like calling on Bridget since she's in Molly Bloom costume. Bridget, would you like to come in and say a quick hello?
I just feel like I'm dominating it today a bit because it's Donal's day and I don't feel like everybody needs a chance to talk. But no, Donal, absolutely, you're such an extraordinary man. Your sensitivity in life, outside of Joyce even, is extraordinary. I just loved your stories. It was most unexpected, your talk about managing the school and how you looked on everything, and simple things like the gingham tablecloth and treating people like, like kings and queens rather than dismissing people, and giving children the confidence, and the Irish-English connection, which was a horrendous time, most Irish people in England, and you experienced that at first hand. So I loved all that. Your passion for Michael D, as one like myself, I don't know him, and your passion for Joyce. First of all, you're an amazing reader. I loved your reading powers. I mean, you just have it in spades. It's delightful. You've caught every mood and assonance in Joyce. Every bit you have it to a T. So no, it's an absolute privilege, Donal, a privilege to listen to. I just enjoyed it. Couldn't be any nicer for the Bloomsday. Have to start making Hugos now. Feel really out of touch, not knowing how to make a Hugo. That's my first port of call this evening. I've heard about them, but never tried one. So a delight, Donal. And I would have known people like, I would have interviewed a lot of the circle of people that you would have known over the years. The 50s, the 50s Bohemia, who would have known, you know, all like, you know, James O'Grady and all those people, extraordinary erudite Bohemians, you know, I would have interviewed a lot of them. And so that era is very familiar to me, to the older people that I met. But thank you so much, an absolute privilege, a privilege. I hope we meet again. You know.
I will. I'm coming to see you, definitely.
You're
Let me
all
just say, another drink. Joyce was a Bohemian. He opened the first cinema in Dublin.
Yes.
He tried to sell Donegal tweed in Trieste.
Yes.
He was a rogue, but he also spent time in Paris. I mean, he left at 22 years of age and ran away with Nora. And there's a Limerick connection. Finn's Hotel, where he met Nora, where she was a chambermaid. Apparently, Finn's owned a pub in Limerick in William Street. And I got a letter from somebody in America telling me. But when they were in Paris, the drug of the day wasn't marijuana, and they all sat around drinking this stuff.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, the green theory.
It was illegal in some places. I mean, I got this in Cork, and it's 77% proof. I did a talk in St. John's Castle in Limerick, and I was, you know, trying to give people a feel of everything. And I bought some of those little tiny sample plastic things, and I said, would anybody like to try it? You know, and there was a cohort of quite elderly ladies in the corner. Oh yes. Now, if you drink absinthe, knock it back, you know, you're dead. It gets you in the throat. You need to mix it or something. And they all went. But they came back for more. I was shocked. That was amazing.
Yes, yeah. No, I love all that. I said to Colm and the guys that after this, there's an open invitation to everyone to come to the cottage when things come down, and we'll try the whole lot. We'll do the Hugos as well.
Right.
In honor of the day, I'll definitely promise Hugos, definitely, and a bit of Burgundy too, a few other things.
Lovely. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Bridget, you just made it my day, and Sarah Ward jumping up and down.
Yes,
She's on bookingbus.com.
Yes, yeah, you'll have to get a bus to come up. Yeah.
That's great, great. Career, that was just a beautiful conversation. Thank you, Bridget, for coming in there, and apologies for putting you on the spot, but it was absolutely appropriate. Going to go to Princess Shelley, if I may. Thank you, Princess Shelley.
Busy cafe. Everybody's flying in with the comments, and thank you, everybody. It really makes it so rich, and thank you, Donal. We were joined, first of all, Christine Duff, who joined us for a very poignant interview last week. Thanks for being here again, Christine. Christine says, hi everyone, I'm listening, but I have myself muted and the camera's off as I'm multitasking this morning. But she did say then, Donal, your energy is absolutely incredibly infectious, and 3 smiley emojis. And that was when you opened up with that lovely opening this morning. So you were going to say?
Yeah, I just want to say that that wasn't all my own work. It's somebody that many of you will know, Joseph O'Connor. I adapted it and changed it a bit, but I wouldn't like to. I need to acknowledge Joseph O'Connor. Sorry.
Oh no. Well, you did an absolutely fantastic job of delivering it, Donal. You know, and that's what captivated our audience immediately within moments, not even seconds. And Gay Moore, who we had yesterday and who you've mentioned a few times, says wonderful, Donal, and again that was as you were delivering that lovely opening. And Janie Lazar, who is joining us very shortly in the Café at 11 show, so Janie says, bringing the style of Joyce to us, everyday people right now, fabulous, and I'm feeling distinctly underdressed too. So you're looking wonderful, Janie, and it's lovely to have you here, and thank you. And Janie went on to say, just like in Glasgow, great music rings out from the Punnet, and Punnet Health Store puts us in a good mood and the feet tapping and draws everyone in and sends the spirits soaring sky high. So thank you very much for that, Janie. So then Eamon said that when you were setting the perspective there on Cromwell, he said that his brother has actually written a successfully acclaimed children's book called Cromwell, Most Hated Man in Irish History. So, and he was just saying when you were setting the perspective that Eamon is actually from Drogheda, and I believe there's a street in Drogheda called the Scarlet Street, and it comes from Cromwell reporting back to the Crown that the streets of Drogheda run scarlet with the blood of Irish Catholics. So, so there's another link there that, thank you for that, Eamon, educating us all today. And Kristen, who always pops off just before we get to this point, coming in from Sweden in Malmo, says, what a wonderful, warm, generous man. I could listen to him for hours. So and I'm seeing lots of nodding in the cafe, Donal, because like I say, your delivery is just so natural, you know. Karen, thanks for joining us. Karen says, lovely presentation, thank you. Would love to also have another opportunity to hear Bridget's 2 to 5 minute synopsis. So that was on, I think it was Ulysses, Bridget's laughing. This was as we were opening up the cafe and people were beginning to take their seats. We have this kind of 10 minutes of kind of informal chat. And that was as I entered the cafe. Bridget was full flight on bringing us all up to speed on Ulysses. So Karen would love to hear that again, and we'll see what we can do with that for you, Karen. Tim Kelly, our resident pup, who's here most mornings, he's beavering away behind the scenes. He's keeping busy, low profile. But when you were talking, Donal, about Bruff, he said he lived upstairs at Clancy's for 6 months.
Wow.
So back to those separation, you know, there's very few, that's saying. So, and then, you know, when you turned, Donal, you were referring to her as your assistant a little while ago, which is a little bit brave. But Jamie said, it's tempting to say behind every great man is a powerful woman. She was just sitting there in the wings, more applause in the cafe.
That's
so,
absolutely true.
that she's right to get her her honouring. So then we went on to talk about Michael D. Higgins. Everybody's so proud of him, Janie, a president to be truly proud of. And Christine said, Michael D. is my favourite. When I watched him interviewed by Tommy Tiernan a few weeks ago, my heart skipped a beat listening to him. If he was on the Coffee with Colm or Coffee at 11 show, it would make 2020 an absolute winner. So yeah, we're throwing that out there. Let's throw out the old intentions there and hope that works for us. So again, Christine said every child has a gift. When you were talking there, and I made a note of that, Donal, as well, you know, treat every child as if they're our own. Every child has a gift and it's our job to find it. And I can relate to that, and I can see that has meant a lot to Christine as well, and having to listen to her interview, I can see why. And Sarah said, Sarah Ward says, just amazing, thank you, love this. And 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 heart emojis. So yeah, and then finally with the absinthe, so many, I won't get to them, but when you said about the absinthe, Christine says something there, oh, great stuff in Cork, all right. So yeah, so there you go. That is, Christina has asked for a copy of the reading. So I think Eamon has popped lots of links there. All the links are there for you guys to click on and have a look at all the great. There's been some lovely quotes and the books that you mentioned, Donal. I think you'll agree there's some fabulous comments, Donal, isn't there?
Lovely, and it's great. I could go on for hours. Unfortunately, I'm terrible for talking.
No, you're not. You're far from it. You're fantastic, and you've captivated the International Cafe today, and I'm sure the replay as well will be the same. And I'm delighted to hand back at this point to Mr.
Here's a message to you all. Can you see that?
Have a blooming great day.
See who it's from? It's from Michael D.
From Michael D. How bad. Back over to you, Colm.
Come here. I'm just loving this. I'm sitting back and I'm absolutely over the moon. I haven't stopped grinning since the show started today. When Donal Thurlow and I, our paths crossed several years ago when I started a thing called Theatre at the Savoy in Limerick City. And it was around the time Limerick was on a downward slope, and we were looking for stuff to bring a bit of vibrancy back in the city. And I had this idea. Somebody said we should bring culture to the city. And I had been involved in Bewley's Cafe on Grafton Street back in the day, and I had been the instigator of what became Bewley's Cafe Theatre on Grafton Street, and it became an institution within an institution. So I said we could probably do the same in Limerick. We could try it. So we started this thing, Theatre at the Savoy, and that's where Donal Thurlow and I first met, at Theatre at the Savoy, lunchtime gig that would happen once a month. And he fascinated me. And then he started sniffing around the cafe over the last couple of months in this Coffee at 11 show. No, but true, right? He did. And so we reconnected. And I said to him one day after the show, I said, would you come on for a chat? And he said, what, me? I said, yeah. He said, I thought it was all about business. I said, it's nothing to do with business. I said, it's the person behind the story. That's what we want to meet. And Gay Moore, lovely to have you back in the cafe today in the audience, but Gay came in and experienced that firsthand yesterday. And we all experienced it with Gay in particular. You know, she came in as the business person and she became a friend very quickly. That's the beauty about what has been created here. I didn't create it. It's been created. All we're doing is facilitating it. So Donal Thurlow, you know, really absolutely pleasure having you. And see Sarah, you know, patting her heart here. Pleasure having you here in the cafe today. And giving us a perspective that we wouldn't normally get. So thank you. Thank you. And to Suzanne, would Suzanne come in and say a quick hello on camera, do you think?
Say hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Good morning.
That'll do. Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you indeed. And listen, an absolute pleasure, Folks, we could go on all day, as Donal Thurlow said, like we could let him off and let him go, but we won't today. We'll save more for some other time. That invitation is firmly out there in the universe that we would like Michael D to grace us, if at all possible, on the 7th of August. And Donal, you're going to ask the first question, see where it leads. And the rest of us are just going to intend it. see where it leads. All right, let me tell you what's happening in the cafe tomorrow on the Coffee at 11 show. Another legend, BB Baskin. BB Baskin is joining us tomorrow on the Coffee at 11 show, and I'm excited and delighted that she is, and really looking forward to her story. What a unique woman, what a unique story. So please make time tomorrow, come into the Coffee at 11 show again, and let's have a chat with BB Baskin. And it just leaves me to thank the team as ever. Princess Shelley, thank you very much for a beautiful show, for producing a beautiful show. Eamon Smith, aka The Monk. Katrina O'Brien in advance, aka Our Rock, for making this beautiful later this evening. And I'd like to thank wigwam.ie SME peer support for their ongoing support. And Donal Thurlow, namaste.
Well, goodbye, everyone, and I really hope you all have a wonderful Bloomsday. I've told you about absinthe, I've told you about Burgundy, and finally I'll tell you about James Joyce gin. So, you know, by tonight, when I've done my final couple of readings, I'll be well settled. But thank you for the invitation, thoroughly enjoyed it.